you everyone for coming. So we're going to do this described walk. It's going to start here in the annex.
Audio description for blind people in movies and TV shows where another audio track is laid down in which details of the visuals are given, that's become more common lately. The latest thing is live audio description, and that's where a trained describer describes things in the community in real time. Places where you might encounter this could be a museum tour, a parade, or a sporting event. What you're about to hear are excerpts from a guided walk that professional describer J.J. Hunt gave for the blind and partially sighted community in Toronto.
Were originally built similar in design to the famous New York City brownstones. So narrow 2- and 3-story row houses with large bay windows, wide steps.
It combines well-researched details that you might get on any walking tour with description and details designed particularly for blind people. They're all things that sighted people take in at a glance, but that blind or visually impaired people may be completely unaware of because they're taken for granted as part of the urban landscape.
The city of York grew and expanded. This became closer and closer to being downtown, and it moved away from being residential to being more commercial. And by the 1960s...
As a blind person, it's an incredible opportunity to do a tour like this in my home city. It takes huge swaths of the urban landscape and fills them in for me with the kind of detail that you're just not going to get as a blind person unless someone who sets out with the intention really puts their mind to describing it for you.
People to sit and have their lunch. We're also just passing there's a crabapple garden here. Originally, this whole area, before it was turned into a village, was an orchard. So one of the little gardens they put in a crabapple garden, kind of to harken back to the time when this whole area was an orchard. On our right, we've got the concrete donuts that the pine trees are in. And just be aware, there's a utility box here. The utility box has actually been painted with sunflowers and butterflies and bumblebees.
It's pretty.
So that's right here, just be aware. One of the things you have to, of course, when you're doing a walking tour, you never know when the Jack in church. And it's a beautiful church with the bell tower up front, stained glass windows, but all the modern buildings are built around. It leads through a ravine. Tattle Creek is buried beneath this pathway. It's still flowing, but it's buried underground now. So the reason I wanted to stop here is this gives us an opportunity to discuss both the ROM, which is on my right, and the Royal Conservatory, which is on my left. So I wanted to stop and compare and contrast their somewhat recent renovations and expansions. So the ROM, which we just walked past, was originally built in 1914. Romanesque revival is the architectural style. It's a staid and strong building, both inside and out, and it was built to kind of convey civic optimism, status, and power. Thick walls of pale gray stone. The building is only 3 stories tall, so it's quite squat. And the lintels around those windows are adorned with carvings and pattern details in the plaster and the stones. Like the original construction, the whole point of this expansion was to achieve some status. This was all about status. This is power. This is Toronto, Toronto, the world-class city. But the way you achieve status has changed, right? When the original building was built, it was about civic pride, staid and strong and thick brick. Now, the way to achieve status is to be splashy, right? You want to be a news story. You want to be reported. So that's where they came up with this concept of the crystal. Now, on my left is the Royal Conservatory. Now, the Royal Conservatory also started with a historical building. The original historical building is the 4.5-story tall McMaster Hall. It typifies kind of high Victorian style of the 1880s. Very proud, but also very showy. It's built of red brick. It's got a rough gray sandstone foundation. There are decorative patterns that are built right into the red brick construction. There's an arched red brick portico that kind of comes out the front of the building. So the stairs leading up to this portico with arches on 3 sides. There are multiple chimneys and an entire row of dormers. So the very ornate roof line to this building. It's got a slate roof, and a large turret on, if you're facing it, what would be the left-hand side. Again, the CN Tower was built between 1973 and 1975. It's considered 1970s futurism. So insert your woo soundtrack here. The main construction, the main kind of staff, the tower itself is built with 3 gently curving buttresses that come straight up, and they end at the main sphere, which is about 2/3 of the way up. On top of the main sphere, there's like a crown-like ring, and this is the rigging for the edge wall. So this is where, if you want, you can walk out on top of the CN Tower. They hook your rigging, so you've got like a climber's belt harness on, and you can hook up to this ring on top of the sphere and actually lean out over the edge. So above that, there's more kind of tall shaft, a cylindrical shaft. Then you get to the smaller sky pod above that, and then there's a steel mast above that. That's 350-foot tall steel mast, and it's like stacked cylinders of decreasing diameter. So each cylinder gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you get to the very top, which is painted red. The whole thing is 1,815 feet tall. That's an equivalent of about 147 stories. Now, from here, you get some sense of how big it is compared to the other skyscrapers, but you still don't get a totally accurate sense, because when one building is in front and the CN Tower is further away, the building that is closer appears taller. So in order to really get an idea of just how colossally tall the CN Tower is, what I'd ask you to do is imagine that you are the CN Tower. So you are not 5'5", you are now 1,815 feet tall. Most of the condos and office towers in the city are about 40 to 60 stories tall. So they come up to your thighs. The tallest skyscraper in all of Canada, is also in Toronto, and it's 978 feet tall, first Canadian place. The second tallest building in all of the city comes up to your waist. The building are windowless concrete. In fact, one of the sides here where the 2 buildings are offset, there's enough room for a giant ad. The ad that's it's like a banner ad that's up right now. It's an ad for the Apple Watch, and there's a picture of a jet black basketball and the hand of a very dark-skinned black man kind of draping down beside the ball, and the man is wearing the new Apple wristwatch. So it was opened in 1968 as the infamous Rochdale College. Anyone heard of Rochdale College?
No, never heard of it.
So Rochdale was a free experimental university. It offered cooperative living space for students and teachers alike, and it was situated right here, which was at the edge of U of T, and it was only blocks away from Yorkville. Now, it might seem a little bit odd, but this unpretentious, modern, brutal architecture was in fact in keeping with a lot of the ideals of co-op living. So you had shared bathrooms and kitchens in some cases. You had a lot of common space for the exchange of ideas. We are very much in a residential neighborhood now. You know, you can hear it, you can feel it. There are lots of trees here. It's a lovely street, Madison Avenue. So here on Madison, this area of the annex was it's kind of full of Victorian and Edwardian architecture. So we're talking built in the late 1880s, early 1900s. Madison is a wide street. There are buffers of grass and trees between the sidewalk and the road. That's on both sides of the street, which is rather unusual. And a lot of these buildings, a lot of these what were originally houses, are referred to as annex-style houses. The style is attributed to the architect named E.J. Lennox. The very first example of this style of architecture is just up the street, number 37 Madison, and the design for that one house was imitated and then modified for over 2 decades and built all around this area. So the annex style borrows elements of Romanesque revival. So think of the Royal Conservatory building that we already passed. A lot of those elements, and also the Queen Anne style. So think like British Manor House. Again, it's red brick. A lot of the buildings have arches over the windows, arches over the doors, and detailed in the brick construction. Detailings in the brick, detailing in the clay, in red clay tile. Often the foundations and the entrances, or sometimes the whole first floor is done in sandstone from the Credit Valley, and then the rest of the building would be the red brick. In a lot of these buildings you've got corner towers, turrets, dormers, and often on the second floor you'll have an inset porch with a brick half wall, or even an ornate railing, an ornate wooden railing. Now these were originally built as single family homes for the elite. They are large houses. Some of them are still single family homes. But of course, as the city has changed, they've now been adapted. Right now, as I've said, we're standing in front of the Madison Pub. The Madison Pub is actually two separate mansions side by side. There are some round beer signs for Heineken, Carlsberg, Stella, Rickards, and across on the black, there's like a black fence around the front of the building. There's a banner for a Budweiser cheering on the Blue Jays. So a few of those kind of bar details, but the actual buildings themselves are still very much the original mansions. A few feet away, we've got the Madison Manor. It's a boutique hotel, 16 Madison Avenue. According to their website, 23 rooms decorated in the style of country inns. The rooms feature fireplaces, alcove windows, and private balconies. The only thing that distinguishes it from any of the other just single-family mansions on the street is the kind of wooden hand-painted sign in front of the building that kind of looks like a permanent real estate sign, but otherwise it's got a beautiful manicured garden and it looks like any other mansion on the block. Just past the Madison Manor is where the U of T fraternities start. There are a handful of U of T frat houses. So frats at some point bought these beautiful mansions and have turned them into, like, you know, rom-com or you know, gross out comedy frat houses that you see in the movies, right? Yeah. So right here, the first one is Theta Delta Chi. So the Greek letters, the first one, theta, is like a circle with a bow tie inside, then a triangle, then an X. Theta Delta Chi. The frat houses tend to be a little bit more run down than the other mansions on the street. So they've got like the Theta Delta Chi now has asphalt shingles instead of slate tiles on the roof. The paint around the trim is starting to peel a bit. The lawn at that frat house is just an ordinary lawn, not a manicured garden, and it could do with a cut. But otherwise, it's still just one of the mansions. And it is very, very, very much a frat house. From the street, you can see there's a pool table right in the front hall. And the day that I was here doing my notes, and I heard from inside, yep, that's a frat house, that's a frat house. A little tree, a couple of bike racks, and across the street to my right, so we just walked past the Trinity St. Paul's Church. So Trinity St. Paul's is a Romanesque revival church completed in 1889. It's made of dark, rough Credit River stone. It's got a boxy bell tower, 3 round stained glass windows on the second floor, very unusual, big round stained glass, and it flanked by 2 smaller round stained glass windows. It's got a reputation as an activist church with social justice leanings. It's got a mixed congregation, home to a Baroque orchestra. It's a really interesting church, and I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about the sidewalk. I want to talk about the ground that we're standing on. The city of Toronto, like most cities, constantly has spray paint markings all over the sidewalks. Blue markings, orange markings, neon pink markings, white markings. So I want to talk a little bit about what these markings are. So a lot of these markings start with an arrow, and then around it are numbers and symbols and letters. Sometimes right here at my foot here, there's like a circle with a cross through it. Kind of looks like the crosshairs on a rifle sight. And there's a little notation, BH25, and then in parentheses 2M. And what these markings are notes from different city departments to each other when they're preparing for construction. So if you see blue markings, the blue markings, those are for water mains. So you'll have a directional arrow in blue, and then markings around it to say how deep, how long, all of those types of things. Green markings, those are for sewers. Orange markings, so like this orange marking here, this would be for Bell Canada or Rogers cable, so these are telephone and cable markings. Yellow, those are gas lines. Always want to know where the yellow ones are. Red ones, red markings are for hydro. The pink markings, those are surveyors markings. The white markings are for sidewalk and road repair. The other thing I wanted to talk about are these bicycle posts. So there are a handful here. The top of the post comes about waist high, and then below it there's a metal ring, an aluminum ring. So these bicycle locks were started as a pilot project in 1984. They started with 25 rings. And as I say, the tall post, the vertical post is embedded right in the concrete, and then the ring is bolted at the top and the bottom. The design's been tweaked a little bit, but it's more or less the same as when it was originally built in 1984. And if you feel your way around the ring, you can feel the writing that's been built in. It's got raised lettering, and now they say City of Toronto locked bicycle post. And then there's a little smaller ring, kind of a circle inset there, and that's the City of Toronto Works Department. As I said, originally the city had 25 of these rings, massively popular. There are now 17,500 rings across the city, and this design has proven to be so popular and so useful that it's been copied all around the world. So it's been copied in the US, the UK, and Europe, and there are even specialty bicycle posts. So in front of the ROM, there are bicycle posts that are designed like items in the galleries. And these ones I can tell that are here, I can tell these ones are not the originals, because the original posts, the designers of the posts actually had their names engraved in the original 25 posts. So if you're ever curious and you feel it, and you feel the initials DD for David Dennis or EP for Eric Peterson, you'll know that those are
So here we
the
are
original. On Major Street, right in a lovely little residential spot. Quite a few trees, but not that buffer between the sidewalk and the road that we found on Madison. So it's narrower, but still well treed. So this area was built up in the late 19th century, and most of the houses were and still are of the bay and gable variety. So bay and gable Victorian houses. And what makes a bay and gable house? First of all, you've got a large 2 or maybe even 2.5 story tall bay window that takes up perhaps half of the house. And often those bay windows are capped with a gable roof. They were usually built out of red brick. They're often very tall and narrow. And lots and lots and lots of neighborhoods in Toronto are packed with bay and gable houses, either in standalone houses, semi-detached, so 2 houses with 1 common wall, or in rows of 3, 4, 5, even more. So lots of neighborhoods. Cabbagetown, Little Italy, the Annex, all have lots of these bay and gable houses. Not as elite as Madison Avenue, but these were still prosperous. When they were first built, they were built for prosperous families. Now the changes in population over the years have had a direct impact on how this housing stock is used. So, as I say, originally built for prosperous single families, by the 1920s to the 1960s, there was a significant Jewish population in this neighborhood, and you started to see multiple families that were linked together living in one house. So still technically one group of people, not a fully subdivided house, but multiple related families in one home. Then through the 1960s and 70s, the neighborhood was increasingly popular with students, Portuguese and Chinese immigrants, and some of these buildings were then turned into apartments. So where you had multiple families that were linked, now you separated into distinct apartments. Now by the 1980s, now you've got gentrification moving in, and some of these rooming houses, some of these apartment houses are now being turned back into single family homes. So just to give you an example of the way some of these different houses have changed with the times, one of the ways you can do it is you can just maintain your original beautiful house. So We've got one building that's just off to my left behind you guys. It's a beautiful red building, red brick. The brick has been restored. All of the window sills have been painted with black trim. There are nice window boxes in front. There's a large tree. Taking a look, I've only seen one mailbox, one doorbell. Odds are that's still a single family. As these older houses start coming down, we're going to be seeing more and more of this style, more suburban architecture in these old Victorian and Edwardian neighborhoods. So we're going to continue down, just a couple more stops. This is Central Tech School, Central Technical and Commercial School is the full name. Sometimes Central Tech gets a bit of a bad rap these days, but in fact, it's an extremely interesting school with a long history and an absolutely amazing campus and facility. So construction began on the main building, the original building, in 1913. Oh, wow. And that's when this was an apple orchard just outside the northwest corner of the city. So again, we're outside the city when this school was built. And it was built expressly to be a world-class facility to train skilled workers for both the city and the country. Right? This was a booming young country. We needed skilled workers. They needed an institution that could pump out the tradespeople, and this was the facility that was built for that purpose. It was such a significant piece of the educational infrastructure that the Prime Minister, Robert Borden, actually laid the ceremonial cornerstone. It's a beautiful tree campus. We've just walked along through about half of it. And the main building that's right here, it's kind of on my right, on your left, is large enough that it can house 2,500 students. It's had some additions, but the main building, the facade and the main building are largely untouched. It kind of looks a bit like an Ivy League university, and in fact has been used as a location on many films, and it has subbed in for institutions like MIT and Good Will Hunting. The original building here is 3.5 stories tall, rough gray stone, and it would fall under the collegiate Gothic architectural style. Right in the center where we are here, there's a 5-story central tower, and it's got ornamental turrets on all the 4 corners, and it's flanked by connected wings. The original building wings are symmetrical. There are wide front steps, wider at the base, and then they kind of taper a little bit as you get up to the first floor. And at the first floor, there's a wide, gentle arch that goes over 3 sets of wooden double doors that are kind of recessed behind and under this gentle archway. The archway itself is carved, it has carved stone, and there are 2 columns that hold up the gentle arch. On top of the 2 columns are carved figures. These carved figures were gifted to the school by the Scottish masons who were originally hired to do the building. On the right, there's on top of the column on the right, there's a sculpture of a small gnome who is dressed in an academic cap and gown, and he's writing a book. On the left, on top of the column on the left, is a small gnome who's working with a hammer and chisel. Of course, this to represent both the academic and the tech side. And above this gentle arch is a crest, and there's a ribbon across the carved crest at the bottom that reads industry, intelligence, and integrity. That was the original concept. Now, newer wings have been added. To the south of the building, in 1951, a boxy brick addition was added to the school. This was to add an aircraft and auto mechanics shop. They also added an auditorium and a cafeteria at that time. In the 1960s, 2 completely separate buildings were added at the north end of the campus. And these buildings house an art studio, 2 full gymnasiums, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So this is a whole campus with multiple buildings, beautiful trees. It's really unlike any other school in the TDSB. Now on the west side, so that would be kind of behind me, facing the school, the whole west side of the campus is dominated by the Central Tech Stadium. It's not actually a stadium, it's an outdoor track. It's covered in the winter with a white dome, but it's a university caliber outdoor track. There's a blue oval running track with white lane markings, and that encircles the green field in the middle. But the green artificial turf in the middle is large enough for 4 practice soccer fields to be used side by side, and they can be used simultaneously. There are retractable nets that stretch across the width of the field, so that you can have 4 separate soccer games in that field. So any member of the public can come by at any time during the hours that it's open. Priority is given to the school, so if the school football team needs it, if the school teams need it, they'll kick you out. But otherwise, the facility is open. Honested's is right behind you. So this building goes all along Bloor Street from here where we are, Markham, all the way to Bathurst. It's basically as wide as a city block. As it exists right now, there's room for 6,000 square feet of discount retail. And really, there is no other store like Honested's. The original version of Honested's, the first iteration, was built in 1943 on this spot. Was then expanded in 1946, 48, 52, 58. He just kept growing it and growing it and growing it. And in 1984, it reached the peak size and scale that it is right now. And it housed it employed about 400 people at its biggest. But now it's completely shuttered. Every door has been closed down. Some of them have been boarded over. There's graffiti on all of the windows. Half of the signs have been torn down. And the fact is, as I said, walking up this stretch of Markham, this block of Markham is exactly the same. Every building has been completely shuttered. Now those buildings have still been maintained to a certain degree. This Honested's building has not. It has been let go because everyone knows this one is definitely going to be torn down, completely demolished. Now in its glory, this Honested's building was famous for its garish facade and outrageous signs. So the signs are actually hanging, they're posted on like a shell. The shell of the building is actually like, it's gray corrugated steel, but you would never notice the corrugated steel because the signs themselves are so outrageous and garish. These are red signs, yellow in the middle, golden yellow in the middle, and then with red frames, and they're surrounded by dozens and dozens of light bulbs. In fact, over 23,000 light bulbs were required to light this place at its peak. The big main signs, there are 4 big main signs kind of on both of the Bloor Street corners. So on both sides of both corners, great big huge signs that just said Honested's. These look like something out of a Las Vegas circus. Then there are smaller signs that are posted around the building as well that have like retail jokes and puns on them. So the great big Honested's sign that was on the corner right above us, it's been ripped out and it's going to be moved. It's going to be refinished. All the wiring has to be replaced, and it's going to be moved and put on the back of one of the Mirvish theaters on Yonge Street. So it will still have a place in the Toronto cityscape. But what's interesting, I came here yesterday just to do a walkthrough, and since I had done my research, it had been torn down. And what it's exposed by removing the sign is amazing. So there are great big holes in the in that steel, in that corrugated steel. This would have been where the sign was bolted to a now exposed steel framework that is around the whole building. So I can surmise that inside here you've got an original brick building, and then that whole brick building has been clad in this like steel framework, and then the corrugated steel attached onto there. And so the steel goes actually much higher than the original brick building behind it. Now inside the building, they had the vibe of like your friend's half-finished basement reno, right? The ceilings were dropped ceilings. The floors were all mismatched. The only thing that was matching on the interior were the signs for things like, underwear, 3 for $1, socks, paints over here. All the signs that were used inside the building were hand-painted, right up until the day it closed. Hand-painted signs, red and blue, kind of a comic book style font. and lots of exclamation points used on those signs. Now, of course, this was Toronto's original discount store, but times changed. The city moved on. Ed Mirvish himself died in 2007. The store closed in 2016. And the whole property that was owned by Mirvish Village, so that's this whole block, all the way down this side of Markham, and half of the block on the other side, that's 1.8 hectares of property owned by the Mirvish family. That was sold to a developer based out of Vancouver for $72 million. The new plan, as it currently exists, will have multiple high-rise condos. There will be a park. The current idea is this strip of Markham, which has Victorian houses turned into retail, very much like the strips, the commercial strips in Yorkville. Those are right now going to be maintained, and this will become a partially covered. So they're kind of going to build like a bit of a Disneyland, like Market Street, where it's like these original buildings that are all going to be, Disneyfied and turned into this, this village. Kind of strange. The whole area, when it's rebuilt, they claim will have over 1,000 residential units, 190,000 square feet of commercial space. Honest Ed's, 6,000. The new development, 190,000 square feet of commercial space. So that'll be retail, office buildings, parking for 669 cars and 876 bicycles.
Oh, wow.
But right now, it's a completely derelict site. This whole block is completely derelict. Honest Ed's, as I mentioned, is in complete disarray. It's dirty, it's covered in graffiti. Now, some of the graffiti is just, standard vandalism, but some of it's interesting. Some of it is people tagging. So tagging, that's when graffiti artists scribble their names really quickly in spray paint, and only other taggers are able to read it, so they know what graffiti artist has been in what neighborhood. But some of the graffiti is actually kind of artful. I saw one piece of graffiti when I was doing my research. Someone had written in black Sharpie, "Stay away from people who make you feel like you're hard to love." And then right beside it, in a purple marker, someone had replied, "Okay." That was rather nice. It's also kind of been turned, if you leave any space open in the city, people are going to start to poster, right? So there are posters advertising protests. There's a poster right here advertising the Toronto Tattoo Show, rock concerts. But there are also independent artists who have made their own photocopied art posters and just turned this into a gallery. So I went around the building and kind of took notes of a few of those posters, those art posters. There's one lovely little poster with a drawing of a small creature who's wearing an oversized t-shirt. And the t-shirt reads, "A sincere apology to all victims of my social awkwardness." There's a mock warning sign, but it looks very official. It's complete with the official city logo using official City of Toronto fonts. And it's on several different parts around this whole site. And it says, "Warning, gentrification in progress." Which I think is rather fitting. And what I always say when I end tours like this, if you guys like having things described, you guys like having events described, tours described, call any single event in Toronto. Call the Buskers Fest. Call the CN Tower. Call all these institutions and just ask quite innocently, do you offer audio description tours? Do you offer? And if they get enough people asking, then they start calling the likes of me, and then we can start arranging. If I call them, nothing self-serving about this, at least.
Everybody wins.
Everybody.